So hello there and welcome to another episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. My name is Adam Burns, your host for this podcast, and joining me on this episode once again is my co-host, Mr. Courtney Pine. Courtney, how are you this weekend? You doing okay?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Just getting over and digesting yet another eventful race, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we said last week that the Tuscan Grand Prix, because I'm not going to pronounce the actual official name because that's just way too long a hashtag to put in. But the race in Mugello, we expected a complete contrast to what we got in Monza, and that was an absolutely mental race. And in fairness, this one was as well, but for completely different reasons to some degree. So I think first things first, we have to obviously pick this apart and go into the finer details. But the headline from the race was Lewis Hamilton winning in the Tuscan Grand Prix at Mugello, his 90th race victory of his career, now putting him one more win behind the illustrious record set by Michael Schumacher. And considering 7 years ago, when before the turbo hybrid era started and Lewis was finding his feet at Mercedes, winning his first race for the team at Hungary, I think it's fair to say that none of us expected where Lewis would be 7 years from now. Obviously, since then he's won 5 world championships. I'm getting ahead of myself now. Almost saying 6 there. I mean, technically it's not over. He's 55 points ahead now of Valterri Bottas. Although, in fairness, I think you and I would probably agree that it's his championship to lose at this point. But I don't think we'd have predicted that Lewis would have been on this monumental rise, winning 5 of the next 7 world championships since he's joined Mercedes, and several race victories after that. I think he's nearly won 70 Grand Prix with them, something along those lines. I might be wrong. I'd have to check the actual numbers, but I think he's now at the point where he's almost won, if he hasn't already won, the most Grand Prix for a single team in Formula 1. I mean, that might be still Schumacher's. I'd have to check that as well. But Courtney, I think how would you be able to summarise this incredible display over the last 7 years from Lewis Hamilton? Could you have foreseen it back then, that he would be literally on the verge of equaling Schumacher's race victories record and, of course, his World Championships record, as well as beating several others as well?
Now, you know, Adam, more than anybody, I've always been a massive fan of Lewis's from the start of his F1 career. But not even I would have expected him to come as far as he has. In terms of not only his innate ability, which I do feel that with his ability he has always been the best of his generation. I've always been a firm believer in that from the Vettel era, shall we say. I've always been a firm believer that Lewis has been the best of that generation. But there were, every season almost, you was just thinking, next season Red Bull going to catch Mercedes, next season Ferrari are going to catch Mercedes, and it's never materialised. Mercedes, and Lewis in particular, have always found a way to take that next step forward. They've always relished a challenge. There's been new challenges every season with changes in regulations to try and slow Mercedes down. But in a way, it's actually given them something new to work for, which is why there's been such a sustained dominance by Mercedes and Lewis. And yeah, without getting carried away this season, because things can go pear-shaped very quickly in this sport, as we all know, I'm just looking at these stats, and even as a fan, I sometimes take a step back and I'm in sheer disbelief at what this man is achieving.
Yeah, I mean, the sheer awe of it, considering what Lewis and Mercedes have achieved over the last 7 years, is nothing short of monumental. I mean, as I said, 7 years ago, Lewis Hamilton was winning his first race for Mercedes at the Hungarian Grand Prix. And this was at a time where we always saw the potential for Mercedes to get race wins and perhaps challenge for world championships. They were always trying to battle for it ever since Nico Rosberg got the first win for the team back in 2012 at the Chinese Grand Prix. It was their first victory since their return to the sport. And since then, they've been on this meteoric rise in the sport. They acquired Lewis Hamilton from McLaren back at a time when McLaren arguably had the best car on the grid after winning the final race of the season with Jenson Button, and then it took a huge nosedive in 2013. It didn't really work out, and then of course we had the rule changes in 2014. We entered the turbo hybrid era, and since then they've completely dominated it and they've gone from strength to strength, and they've never really looked back. And Lewis has really capitalised on this. He's really shown or highlighted, I suppose, how dominant they have been, especially in his hands. It's been the perfect combination. As I said, we've seen some famous combinations in the past, the likes of Schumacher at Ferrari, obviously Vettel had a time at Red Bull, Senna in the McLaren, and obviously Williams, with several drivers being successful there in the early 90s as well. It's those levels of dominance where you sort of wonder how long they can keep it going. That's always been the question. When is the next competitive fight? Where is it going to come from? And every single year, not only do Mercedes seem to rise to the challenge, but they also push the ceiling and break the limits that many in the sport couldn't believe was possible. They keep doing it time and time and time again. I think this season in particular has been the real surprise of how they've been able to shatter that ceiling of performance and find more performance than other teams have had. You almost think the teams would be closing up to them. They've reached the limit and teams are trying to close up to them, but it's been the opposite. Mercedes have stretched their advantage further, and Lewis has constantly found new ways to improve his own drive, and it's culminated in this unprecedented period of dominance that we're seeing from him right now.
But I feel that the race that just occurred in particular, I just feel that it highlights how exceptional Lewis is, again, within this generation, because he's won races in many different ways. I know having the best car does help, but he's won in wet races, he's won races in the past where he shouldn't have done, actually, particularly in these McLaren days. But even a race like today, where I know he's only coming against his teammate, but let's not forget, Adam, that Valtteri Bottas, okay, given his standard, he has generally been below Lewis, but he took a step up this weekend. He was fast throughout practice sessions. He's very close to getting pole position, was Valtteri, and he did overtake Lewis at the start. But given the circumstances of the race, which I'm sure we'll go into with the red flag standing starts, Lewis overtook Valtteri from second at the first restart, but was able to defend the second restart from first. And I just feel that he was able to display various strengths of his throughout that race.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make, and it's been the tale of this season. The fact that I agree with you with Valtteri Bottas, he finally started to show signs that he was ready to take the fight to Lewis, but it's a case of too little too late. And when the scenario came up where Valtteri had the opportunity at the third restart, at the third restart to overtake Lewis on that side of the grid, which seemed the more favourable option, it just never really manifested for him. He never really was able to do it. He never delivered on it, and if anything, he was overtaken by Ricciardo in the Renault. So it really epitomised what this gulf, I suppose, between the two drivers, and how Lewis has completely left Valtteri in the dust. Despite Valtteri being a bit more resurgent today, it just seemed the same old story, and that Lewis had him covered off. But of course, we've got to get into the race before we go more on that. So, of course, the first race for F1 in Mugello officially in the region of Tuscany in Italy. A complete contrast, as we mentioned before, to the Italian Grand Prix in Monza, where we saw Pierre Gasly finally come back down to earth, I believe is probably fair to say, after...
With a bang.
With a bang, indeed, after winning his maiden victory in Formula 1 for the AlphaTauri team. And obviously, it was a very good start for Valtteri Bottas. He got away very, very well indeed, was able to overtake Lewis Hamilton to go into the lead of the race. And at that point, I looked at it and thought, yeah, it looks like Valtteri may have his day today. This was the sort of result he needed, and the sort of result he would need to achieve and get in front of Lewis early on, because it seemed like the characteristics of the track would render this kind of... if Valtteri was going to win the race, it would render for him to have to overtake Lewis at the earliest opportunity to get it done. And he did that. But then the chaos that ensued behind really threw a lot of curveballs and caveats into this race. And obviously the first of which was the huge incident that took place at Turn 2, where Pierre Gasly, Kimi Raikkonen and Romain Grosjean, 3 cars going into Turn 3 and all sandwiching one another. and ended up causing a massive collision which took out quite a few cars, including Max Verstappen. And unfortunately, yeah.
I feel like, I'm sorry, that's another moment that we need to note that despite Mercedes' dominance, it's always been felt that the main threat to Mercedes has been Max Verstappen. Now, I had a look at the driver championship. I could be wrong, but I'm going to stand by this. I believe that Lewis 80 points clear of Max Verstappen.
I think you're right. I'm just having a look myself. Yes, yeah, you're right. So, I mean, it's such a shame because we do hope that Max is the guy that's going to be able to throw a spanner in the works and really make a race of this. I think F1 fans collectively have depended on Max being able to do that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, today, he didn't get a bad initial getaway. He was alongside Hamilton to overtake him, but then he had issues with his engine, of course, before the start of the race. His mechanics were working frantically on the car to try and fix an issue with the engine. Fortunately, they were able to get it started, but there seemed to be apparently, from what I heard afterwards, there was a sensor issue which caused the car to go into a sort of, not an anti-stall mode, but like a safe mode where it really bogged him down in terms of performance when he needed it most, and he got completely gazumped by so many cars, and then was an unfortunate passenger in an accident where 3 cars behind him were all trying to jockey for the same piece of track, and ended up being knocked off the road into the gravel trap, and that was his race over. Very, very unfortunate for Max Verstappen. As you can see, very, very frustrated. None of his own doing, and was taken out at the beginning of the race. How did you see that incident, Courtney? Because a lot of people felt that there was a combination of a few things, but a lot of people seem to think that Pierre Gasly, the race winner from last week, was the main antagonist in this incident. For me, I kind of looked at it as Gasly kind of put his car into a position where he was always going to be at risk of being hit or being sandwiched. Perhaps he should have backed off. And then, of course, Raikkonen just managed to control his car, but ended up veering to the right and Grosjean on the left. It was always going to end in tears. How did you see that incident?
I feel that particular incident was the result of this track being used for the very long time, or even the first time for these Formula 1 drivers. Because if you think about it, when these drivers go to the same circuits, year in, year out, should say your Spas, your Monzas, your Silverstones, etc., they tend to have a vague idea of which lines are best. Your braking points, optimum lines, given the car you have. They tend to have a good idea, given that they go there every single season. They've come to a new track, let's say, where there's plenty of twists and turns, and I just feel that they were trying out new lines, and I think 1 or 2 drivers, including Pierre Gasly, got a little bit overconfident with that, and that's what resulted in that first crash.
Quite possibly. It's a very narrow track, and a very much a track that relies on the car to be flown, so there's not really too many different lines you can take. I mean, traditionally, it's a MotoGP circuit, and it has been used in the past by Formula 1 teams. I think it used to be a testing circuit in mid-season. I think around about 2012, it was used during the mid-season when they were conducting F1 tests at that time. So some of the drivers like Hamilton, Grosjean, Raikkonen, Vettel would have had experience there in the past, some of the older drivers in the field, whereas other drivers, as you mentioned, would not have had that luxury. I mean, Charles Leclerc had done a few runs there, and he'd also raced in Formula 4 at that race, and so did Lando Norris as well, also raced in Formula 4, so he was familiar with that circuit. It's not traditionally a Formula 1 circuit. Of course, we had incredible races in the F3 series and F2 series, and of course we were hoping for something similar to Formula 1. We were never going to get that kind of race, and I think probably a good opportunity to congratulate Oscar Piastri, who won the Formula 3 championship today for the Prema team, the young driver who is part of the Renault Drivers Academy. So he will definitely be a driver to look out for, the young Australian, mentored by Mark Webber, of course, former Formula 1 driver. And it was a great day for him, and a great day for the Prema team, Italian base as well, to win the championship on their own patch. He's definitely a name to remember and to look out for in the future. So I'm sure he will most likely get promoted into the F2 series, perhaps with the Prema team as well, depending on what happens there with the likes of Mick Schumacher as well. So that's definitely one to keep an eye out for. But that kind of track, it's not one that you would expect tight racing in Formula 1. It's not built for that purpose. It was built originally as a test track and as a MotoGP circuit as well, where it's often there. And as you mentioned before, you see Formula 1 cars going closely together. It was always going to end in tears. And it was one of those incidents where Max Verstappen was trying to be conservative when he got bogged down. And unfortunately, he was tagged and taken out of the race by a couple of drivers who were trying to be over-aggressive at the start. It was one of those tracks, perhaps, because of its nature, people were trying to make up as many places as possible off the start because they felt that if they got held back, they would struggle to make up places during the race. So, there's so many different ways that you can look at it. But of course, we fast forward to that safety car that came out in response to that. And then this is when the chaos started to ensue. With the safety car restart, we were about 9 laps in, I think it was, when the safety car was coming into the pit lane. And the back straight is over 1 kilometre long, and it was a massive headwind. So slipstreaming and DRS were going to be even more overpowered, or OP if you like, than they would normally be. And what happened, for those of you that didn't see it, was Valtteri Bottas weaving, as you would expect normally, and going slowly, but not going too fast or too slow, but was waiting to the last possible moment to get going. Now, the rule is with a safety car is, once the race gets underway, you cannot overtake until you cross the start-finish line, which Valtteri left as late as possible to defend from his teammate, which seemed the sensible thing to do. And it was the same thing that was done in F3 and F2 when the same situation.
Yeah.
And what happened was the concertina effect caused the guys at the back to someone to try and make a jump forward, which I believe it was Nicholas Latifi and Antonio Giovinazzi. And because you had cars in front that were going slowly and they were going fast, it caused a massive collision, which took out, I think, around six cars. I believe 5 or 6 cars.
Yeah, it was 6. Yes, it was. I think it was 6 at the first red flag, I believe, yeah.
Yes, I think it was obviously Latifi, Giovinazzi, Magnussen, Sainz, and I think it was just those 4 because Esteban Ocon went out a bit later. But it caused a huge crash. And of course that caused the first red flag. Now, I've got to ask, Courtney, I mean, we were sort of going in and out of how we felt about that incident, but how did you see that incident? Who do you think Valtteri was to blame for that, for slowing the pack down too much, or did you feel that he did everything right and perhaps it was caused in the midfield? Where was your stance on that incident?
I feel that it was an unfortunate accident, to be honest, because I feel that Valtteri was doing the right thing. He's protecting his lead. He complied with the rules. I just feel there was almost like a miscommunication because, you know, they can't. If you're at the back, you know, like Latifi, you can't see what's going on when you've got 10, 12 cars in front of you between yourself and Valtteri. You can't see what's going on, and all they saw was a green light. So, particularly, you got to imagine, I know these guys are supposed to be the pinnacle of their sport, but you got to imagine the level of adrenaline these guys have got driving these cars. They've seen a green light, and I just feel that, and have an instinct where they want to win. These guys, doesn't matter if they're at the top or the bottom, they all have such a hunger to win. You put that together with adrenaline, you see a green light, you're going to go, aren't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
That's the thing, and I feel I just feel there's a miscommunication almost with the dash light, and I think Carlos Sainz touched on it. I think it's something they need to look into because they physically can't see what's going on 10 cars ahead of them. So it was a miscommunication. So I don't blame a particular driver, but I do understand the anger from the drivers involved because that could have been really nasty.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And for those of you that are hearing a little bit of background noise, I do apologise for that. And also hearing me try to clear my throat. I've been shaking off the remnants of a cough lately, so it's caused me to have to clear my throat a little bit every so often. So I do apologise about that if you are picking any of that up on the podcast. But I absolutely agree, Courtney. I think the nature of the circuit, as we said before, that it warrants drivers to try and take every opportunity that they can to get overtakes done as and when they can do it, because it's not an easy track to make overtakes on, with the exception of turn 1. And what we saw was a situation where Valtteri Bottas was weaving to keep the tyres warm, of course, but that's absolutely fine. He wasn't going fast and then slowing down, going fast and then slowing down, which we have seen some drivers do in the past when leading a safety car queue. Lewis talked about the safety car lights going off a bit later than they probably should have done. We saw the green flag, which is telling the guys behind that it's okay to go racing. But I think the one thing that I noticed was a lot of the guys in the midfield were spreading out all over the place, trying to find the right piece of track to get onto so they could take advantage and anticipate when Bottas was going to go.
Yeah.
And that's totally understandable. But the fact of the matter is that the safety car line to when you can start overtake is the start-finish line. We've gone past the days now where the safety car line is a bit further back, i.e. before the last corner. Perhaps that's something that should be considered in the future for safety. But similar to how Baku works, the drivers behind are always going to get edgy and want to try and get a move on and try and guess when the leader's going to go. And unfortunately, we ended up with a situation where Valtteri did what he had to do, which was in the rules and seemed perfectly fine to do. But it always takes one person to go for it, and then it prompts everyone else to go. But then there are people that aren't doing it, and you mistime it, and you create an incident like that. So it was very dangerous, the incident itself. But I do not lay any of the blame at Valtteri Bottas, and I'm certainly glad that the stewards did not feel that way either, because it certainly was not his fault. I've seen other drivers, even seen Lewis Hamilton in the past. Not that he mentioned Valtteri Bottas in this instance, but I've seen quite often when he's led the safety car, and Sebastian Vettel as well, they've done this. They've gone fast and a bit slower to try and tease people as to when to go, but then they bunch everyone up and it's almost a little bit more dangerous than you like. But this situation, Valtteri was definitely not doing anything wrong, at least in my opinion, at least. Obviously, feel free to let us know what you guys think as well in the comment section below if you are watching this on YouTube. So obviously we're moving on to the next part of the race. We had the red flag, which unfortunately caused us to lose another driver. We lost Esteban Ocon, who had a brake issue. His brakes were completely charred and melted at the rears, and there was a danger that he'd be in a similar situation to Sebastian Vettel at Monza. Now, the brakes weren't going to be used as often or as severely round Mugello. Usually the slowest gear that you would take round there is around third, so not really many braking opportunities, or at least heavy braking opportunities like you get in Monza. But unfortunately it was unsafe for him to continue and had to retire from the race. But as the race went on, it started to develop quite nicely, and obviously Charles Leclerc had a great start for Ferrari, getting up into third place. But then as the race went on, overtake after overtake after overtake, we saw all the hallmarks of where the Ferrari was struggling, not just in a straight line, but also in the corners. I mean, despite how it ended up for him, that must have been a very, very horrible thing for Charles Leclerc and Ferrari to be seeing on what was their 1000th Grand Prix this weekend.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think how many cars finished in the end, wasn't it 12?
Yes, 12.
It was 12, and they finished. Was it
8th and 10th in the end? Yes.
You come on, like, I know. Again, we've had the conversation many times. But come on, there are 12 cars on the grid. Ferrari, the biggest team in Formula 1 history, finishing 8th and 10th out of 12 cars. That is just not acceptable. It doesn't matter what's gone on with the engine or anything like that. That's simply not acceptable for a team of that size.
It's very, very difficult for Ferrari at the moment. Of course, we're going to talk a bit more about them as it is their 1000th Grand Prix as a bit of a celebration, but obviously looking at where they need to go moving forward. But it was definitely a difficult race for them, although the results were better than they have been in the last couple of weeks. So I suppose it depends on which way you see it. Given where they probably feel they should be, it probably wasn't the worst possible result with both of them scoring points in the race. But obviously we go back to the second restart, or the second start of the race, where Valtteri Bottas was leading the way, and then it was a standing start, and Lewis Hamilton completely got a great getaway and got ahead of him into turn one. And as the race went on, it just felt that Lewis had the race in the bag. Valtteri was trying what he wanted to try on strategy. I mean, he even said to the engineers or his strategists that whatever we do at this next stop, put me on a different set of tyres to Lewis Hamilton. Now, that's quite an audacious call to make when you are running as the second car. It's a good one from Valtteri. Yeah. I like it because it shows that, he's that intent to really attack Lewis, and this is the only way he knows how to do it. Unfortunately for Valtteri, he'd not looked after his tyres as well as Lewis had. Now you can say, following the car in front, being within a couple of seconds, it's always going to create more heat, more turbulent air. It's always going to damage the tyres and add even more load and stress onto them what was already a very difficult track to manage tyres with the high-speed corners that they had. Valtteri kind of lost that, I suppose, the validity of the request when he ended up having to pit first, because what happened is that he pitted onto the harder tyres, and when Lewis came in under the safety car, he went straight onto the harder tyres as well. So I suppose Mercedes, from what I gathered, they probably felt perhaps they could honour that request for Valtteri, but given he made that stop first, why would they then go out their way to put Lewis on a different strategy and risk compromising his race when Valtteri hadn't really given them anything to sort of give him preferential treatment?
No, it wouldn't have made any sense at all, and I feel that it would have caused a lot of upset within the team. And however, there is this argument that Valtteri, this season, probably too late, but going forward, Valtteri does need to be rattling Lewis's cage a little bit the way that Nico did. He needs to be looking at Nico Rosberg as an example, because he successfully done it in 2016 with it a little bit of engine lack, reliability lack, but he did manage overall to get into Lewis's head. And you haven't really seen Valtteri do that yet. No, and there is an added pressure, and there's an added pressure for Valtteri, because he's sometimes so far behind in comparison to Lewis that he needs to start next season strong, or he will end up losing his seat altogether. So he's fighting not only for a championship, but he's also fighting for his long-term future. So he needs to try something and do it fast.
He hasn't been able to sustain any sort of level of dominance since his time at Mercedes. He's won the odd race, but he's never really been able to go on a run where he's won a few races and really put Lewis on the back foot. If anything, Lewis has always seemed to respond immediately to it and then go on a run of his own just to put pay to that. But and it happened once again. Obviously, he had that poor getaway, and obviously as the race unfolded, it seemed likely that we were going to be in a position where Lewis was going to control it. But then, of course, towards the end of the race, Lance Stroll, unfortunately, I think it was a rear puncture or something like that on his car that failed at the second Arrabbiata corner. Very dangerous high-speed incident. Thankfully, Lance is okay. He hit the wall from the side, but that completely ruined his race, and he was on for a very good result himself. So very disappointed for him and the Racing Point team to lose out on that, but thankfully Lance was okay, and he was running an updated Racing Point as well. I think someone joked to me saying that they'd done designs of the 2021 Mercedes, or they got some drawings and made us some parts. 2020 Mercedes, and made some parts on that and put it on the car early rather than wait till 2021. All jokes of that aside, before they outlaw copying. But as I said, it was difficult for them. Obviously, Lance thankfully was okay, but it was another opportunity missed really, and otherwise a decent performance from Lance up until that point. Looked very, very quick and challenging for the podium. But then of course that brought out the safety car and the second red flag of the race. Now, red flags are very uncommon. We very rarely see red flags in Formula 1. We've seen 3 in the last 2 races. It seems to be something with the Italian air or the Italian tracks that seems to create red flag situations, but we had another one, and everybody went into the pits. But this is kind of where a bit more of the chaos ensued. Not necessarily in a destructive way, but just looking through the field, this is where it started to shift up the order, because by then, Daniel Ricciardo looked like he was in a good position to finish in the top 3.
Yeah, it was.
And Alex Albon obviously didn't really look like he had too much to answer with. And what happened was, with the red flag situation, everyone had a fresh change of tyres, a little bit of a shuffle of the order. But what it ended up doing was creating another restart, and this time the roles were reversed. Lewis Hamilton was ahead of Valtteri Bottas on the grid, and we expected Bottas to really challenge Lewis into turn 1, and unfortunately, Bottas got a poor getaway. Not only did he not get past Lewis, but Ricciardo in the Renault overtook him temporarily to take second place, and that completely ruined Valtteri's race towards the end of it. Of course, Valtteri did get past Ricciardo again to take second place, but he just had nothing to respond to Lewis Hamilton, or if he did try to catch Lewis, Lewis always had that extra time in his pocket to use as and when he needed to.
Well, yeah, in that last stint, we'll call them stints, given there were like two big breaks. In that last stint, again, this just comes to show the level of dominance Mercedes have. They run away at the front, and they were just basically having like a little duel. It was almost like a little game they were having, trying to get fastest lap. One would have a go, Valtteri went fastest, and then Lewis had a go and he got fastest lap himself at the end. So that was a story of the third part when it comes to the Mercs. But the other main story comes from that last stint was seeing Alex Albon get the jump on Daniel Ricciardo. So as happy as I am for Albon to get his first podium, given the tough times he's been going through, I was gutted to see Daniel miss out on that podium, mate. I really was.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Although it was great for Alex Albon, but I'm just looking at the time, and I think it's a good opportunity to wrap this up. But as was obviously for part one at least, and we'll come back for part two to discuss some of the other drivers. But of course, at the end of the race, it just ended up that way, and Mercedes getting another 1-2 for the season. It just seems that this dominance is going to roll on for this Mercedes, and Lewis Hamilton once again getting his race win and his 90th of his career, so very, very close to equaling Schumacher's race wins, and of course on the verge of equaling his championship record of 7 world titles. But we will talk a bit more about this Mugello race and a few other bits of news in the paddock as well for this week in part 2, so make sure to join us for that, and we will see you in just a minute. So welcome back to part 2 of the DNF1 F1 podcast. So of course, in part 1 we were talking about the race, and once again another dominant performance for Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, despite Valtteri Bottas' best efforts when it mattered most. He just couldn't seem to be able to get the right getaway, and it allowed Lewis to comfortably take home what was his 90th win of his career. With incredible feats he's making. It just doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. It's have to sort of wonder how far he can go or how many he can certainly get. Definitely looks like the first man to be able to break the 100 win mark as well. Certainly on the cusp for that. So moving on to the rest of the field, of course, the first thing we've got to talk about is who joined them on the podium, and that was Alex Albon. His first podium in Formula One. It's come at long last. It just seemed that after the way his season has gone this year, of course, what transpired at the end of last season where he looked like he was going to get a podium in Brazil, and he had that collision with Hamilton, which then ruined that chance for him. And then once again, him and Lewis had collided again in the Austrian race, where it looked like he might have been able to win that race, but he ended up missing out on the podium once again. How great must this be for Alex Albon, Courtney, given the stresses he's had, obviously, as we said, missing out on 2 podiums, and how difficult his season has been thus far, with plenty of talk over his future at Red Bull. How relieved must Alex finally be to get onto the podium at long last?
Well, yeah, I expected him to be like hyped up. You know what you usually get when you get like a driver getting the first podium or the first win, screaming into the radio, jumping around. But he just seemed like a relieved man. It was almost like, you know, like when you come home after a rough day at work and you plonk down on the sofa for the first time and you just make that big sigh of relief that it's finally done.
Yeah.
That's how it seemed. That was the demeanour that he gave off when he was on the podium. So I can imagine why it is a big relief for him. You know, it's probably the perfect way for him to bounce back after what happened last week with Gasly. So we know there'll have been a lot of talk about Gasly getting his Red Bull seat back. So in a way, with a little bit of luck along the way, Albon's been able to punch back. So yeah, I think this race come at the perfect time for him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it was definitely an interesting race for Albon. It wasn't the easiest one to manage because of all the restarts and everything else that had to go on, similar to what we had last week to some degree. But this was a race where he qualified very well. His best qualifying, I believe, of his career in top 4, alongside his teammate Max Verstappen. And he looked like he had the pace to potentially challenge for the podium, but of course it would require something to happen to one of the top 3. Of course, his teammate went out in the first lap after a poor start and got taken out. So it presented a great opportunity for Alex to really take advantage of the performance of that Red Bull and how he was driving around this circuit. And it seemed to me that this is one of the better performances from Alex Albon in his career. Sorry if you've heard my phone in the background, that's my brother texting me there, so to ignore that for the time being. Nothing important, of course. But with Alex, yeah, one of his better performances I've seen in the Red Bull, and he looked a lot more comfortable. He didn't really panic either, and of course, when the opportunity presented itself towards the end of the race to make that overtake on Daniel Ricciardo, he went round the outside into turn one, and turn one in Mugello, it's very much an off-camber corner where it's a good, if you get a good run around the outside, there's a lot more traction there, and it opens itself up where you get the inside into turn two. Flows really nicely, so in a way, it really benefited. It was a great overtake on Daniel Ricciardo, of all people.
Yeah,
a man that
that
left Red Bull a few years ago. And so I'm pretty sure the Red Bull boys or Christian Horner would have been very pleased with that particular overtake. And it's, as I said, as you mentioned, Courtney, a sigh of relief from Alex Albon. Definitely needed this podium. And hopefully for his sake, on his future, whether Red Bull will keep him on or whether they move him back to AlphaTauri or what happens, he really needed this for his confidence, because I feel Alex in the past has driven really, really well and delivered some really solid performances, but unfortunately for him, things have gone against him, or he's had bad luck, and it's really compromised or dented his confidence in other races, and he's finally been able to get a result today, which hopefully will spur him on to really unleash that level of performance that we both know he can do on a regular basis, and try and see if he can challenge his teammate and perhaps the Mercedes a lot more often than he currently is doing.
I mean, I'm happy that he's got this podium. I really am, but I don't know. I still look at that Red Bull seat, and I do feel that there needs to be someone else that can challenge Max or help Max challenge Mercedes more into the future. But I don't want to be too negative. Let's focus on the now. And he done well. Given the circumstances, he did well. I thought the overtake on Daniel Ricciardo was pretty good. He said he went around the outside. It was my F1 nerd inside of me just made that move was satisfying, shall we say. The way he just swept around the outside and completed the move, it was good. And I'm pleased for him, because it must be mentally draining driving for a big team with all that pressure on you. Like, I'm sure Valtteri's feeling the same thing right now. But I'm pleased for him, and let's hope, for the sake of the rest of the season, let's hope that he can get a little bit closer to Max, because it was good seeing him start in fourth. So yeah, the Red Bull 3 and 4, and I thought in normal circumstances that would have given Mercedes more of a headache, and I think it could well have if it hadn't have kicked off the way it did at the start. But he needs to be doing this more often, and I think that's what Lewis touched on in an interview, which caused a bit of offence from Red Bull.
Yeah.
That they need that. They need somebody. They need somebody that can regularly challenge Max and push Red Bull forward. And let's hope that this result gives them the confidence and to an extent prove me wrong. I'm sure he cares about that, but prove the doubt was wrong and kickstart another strong end to the season.
We'll certainly hope so, and you're absolutely right. Red Bull have not really had the opportunity to challenge Mercedes with two cars rather than just the one Max Verstappen that they've had for a long time, and this was the first time we thought we might see that. Of course, Max got took out early on, so that kind of really prevented that, but otherwise Alex drove a very good race, made his moves at the right time, and was very much rewarded with a podium that he very much thoroughly earned today. So congratulations to him on that. Hopefully many more from him for the rest of the season. Now, of course, with Alex Albon's delight comes the despair from the Renault team, and Daniel Ricciardo in particular, who looked before the final red flag to have that third place nailed on. There was a time when, as we said, he got up into second temporarily, but once again, Renault denied a podium in the turbo hybrid year. They've not got a podium since the Malaysian Grand Prix in 2011, and they've been getting very, very, very close. Tantalisingly close, if you like, to getting that podium position. And I think another added incentive, I suppose, for Daniel Ricciardo is obviously the rumour around the paddock is that Cyril Abiteboul, the Renault team principal, has promised that if Daniel gets a podium in this Renault car, he would personally get a tattoo on his body of Daniel's choosing. Now, I don't know about you, Courtney, but knowing what we know about Daniel Ricciardo and the designs of his crash helmets and the character he is, I'm pretty certain that tattoo would definitely be very much a spicy one indeed. I mean, for those of you that probably haven't seen this, I don't know if about you, Courtney, but have you ever watched the US version of The Office?
I haven't, no, so you're going to have to explain this one.
So basically, for those of you that have, first of all, fantastic show. I'm not really usually a fan of American remakes of British comedy shows, particularly as this was a remake of the original Office series in the UK that Ricky Gervais created. But this is the one obviously starring Steve Carell, and in this particular episode, the manager of the branch Dunder Mifflin, Andy, he promised he wants to get his staff motivated to do more work and produce better sales. So he rewards them with a point system, and one of which has the end result being Andy would promise to get a tattoo on his derriere, if you like, and the team would have to choose which one he would get, and they achieved this in a day. It was ridiculously hilarious. They all just started working together really hard, got it in a day, and he got a very awful tattoo design. Obviously it's TV, so it wasn't real, but it was hilarious nonetheless. And it kind of reminded me of that, thinking that Cyril Abiteboul, even though he wants them to do well, and it's the incentive for Renault to do well, secretly in the back of his mind is sweating on it, thinking, oh God, if Daniel gets a podium today, what is he going to do to my body? What is he going to have tattooed on me? And that sort of joke. But I'm pretty sure Cyril was always a good sport about it. He'd say that, I'd be very happy if Daniel does that so I can have that. But thoroughly disappointing, considering that Renault and Ricciardo drove a very good race and looked like they may have been able to finally get their maiden podium in the turbo hybrid era. But alas, the red flag came out, bunched the field up, and allowed Alex Albon on fresh tyres to get behind Ricciardo, make that overtake, and take that third place just at the death. So, I mean, Ricciardo's been on the podium plenty of times. I'm sure this one would probably been up there for him with his time at Renault. Is it fair to say that Renault, of the last couple of races, seem to be the team making the most gains? They seem to be moving up the order very, very quickly. Does this mean that there are signs to be more positive for the Renault team about the rules changes, and that perhaps they may be on top of things in the future and may be able to challenge for race wins again?
Well, it does seem that's the direction they're certainly aiming to go in. I mean, the first real impressive performance I saw from them in recent times was Spa, and I thought I might be track specific, but we've gone to three different circuits that have slightly different characteristics, and they've been strong in all three. So the consistency shows they should be optimistic. They've got they're making a change in name, aren't they? Going to, is it called Alpine Racing?
Well, it's spelled Alpine, but it's pronounced Alpine. Alpine, yeah.
I'm not afraid. No, I've said it in a very common English way.
We're still going to be calling it Alpine, even though it's technically Alpine Racing because it's French. So. May we, but
yeah, I think they're showing ambition. They've brought back Fernando, regardless of some of his misdemeanors in the past. He is still a massive name in the sport, which will bring in sponsorship and revenue. And they must be looking at 2022 with plenty of optimism. So yeah, it's certainly the start of some kind of rejuvenation for Renault, because last season or so they were right towards the back. So. I like to see the big manufacturers challenging at the front. I'm a bit of a purist in that sense, so I hope this continues.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, of course, they'll be losing Ricciardo to McLaren next season to partner Lando Norris, which obviously will be a blow, but they will be getting Fernando back, so it's almost a bit of a bittersweet thing. So Renault, as I said, they're going from strength to strength, so this is only a good thing for them. And even though they didn't get the podium today, you almost feel that if they keep plugging away and doing what they're doing, it may come sooner rather than later. This does seem to be the season where people that are plugging away and working hard are rewarded more often than not. Speaking of people and drivers that are plugging away and being rewarded, we'll move on to someone who is plugging away and it's so painful how he's missed out once again on a points finish, and that is George Russell, who finished in 11th place, and obviously you can tell by my abysmal reaction really of the distress, but I really, really feel for George. My heart goes out to him, because today seemed to be the day after 30 Grand Prix that he's been involved in Formula 1. George has always shown hallmarks of a potential race winner and champion in the future, and always seems, for one reason or another, to not be able to get a championship point. And today seemed to be the day where that was going to end. He was running a fantastic race, made some really good overtakes, was running in 9th on merit. And the final red flag came out. And then, of course, that call allowed the likes of Grosjean and Raikkonen to go unlap themselves, get a free pit stop, and Kimi got a brilliant start to get up into 8th, despite the 5-second penalty, and George Russell likewise did not get a good start, got bogged down behind the Ferraris. Of all teams, you think bogged down behind the Ferraris, you didn't think I'd say that too often, but it caused George to finish in 11th place, narrowly missing out on that elusive championship point that just seems to be keeping away from him. I mean, what more does George Russell have to do to win a world championship point? I mean, we're talking about a championship point here. It's almost as if we talk about George, the way he drives, as if he's missing out on race wins and world championships. What more has George got to do?
I don't want to say I feel sorry for the guy, because I'm immensely jealous of him. He's a Formula 1 driver. But he has shown, particularly in his F2 season, that he can not only match, but can outperform the likes of Alex Albon and Lando Norris. He must be seeing them, you know, on the podium, whilst he's struggling to get a point. We know that F1 isn't just down to driver ability. We know that he's been in the worst car. But it must be frustrating for him, and opportunities to go to faster teams hasn't really come his way. And he is the guy in F1 terms is definitely due a break.
Yeah, it just seemed that today was going to be the day. Everything just seemed to be going his way. Drove really, really well. Took advantage of the scenario that he was in, and he had a lot of pace. He made some good overtakes as well. He was battling away very, very well. But he just did not have the pace. He really tried. I enjoyed watching him trying to hunt down Sebastian Vettel in the Ferrari. And you could see the onboards. George was throwing that car 8 ways from Sunday, picking all the right spots, literally committing his life and everything on top of that, just to catch the Ferrari, get into the DRS and pass him, despite Vettel really struggling. It was really handling terribly, that Ferrari. And George, for whatever reason, just did not have the speed in the car to get that move done. It was so gut-wrenchingly close, and I feel sorry for him, but knowing what we know about George, he's a guy of a strong mental character. 30 races in a row now, he's out-qualified his teammate. I mean, not even Lewis Hamilton can boast a record like that, so that is an incredible statistic from George Russell. And he has been improving his racecraft. I think one thing I've noted from George in Formula 1 is that his racecraft has been a bit lacking, I suppose, compared to what we expect from him. But in recent races, he's definitely stepped up, and I really hope more opportunities like this come for George. But as I said before in last week's episode, I think the real problem for George is there isn't really a stopgap move for him into the Mercedes seat where he can go into a kind of like a halfway house team, if you like, under the Mercedes program. Naturally, you'd think that would be Racing Point, which will be Aston Martin, but I'm pretty certain now that we know what that lineup is going to be for next season, so it doesn't really exist for him. He has to just jump all the way into the Mercedes, and until things change fundamentally there, I just can't see that happening, at least until 2021, if it happens in 2022, I should say, if it happens then at all. So hopefully for George, he will get over the line, but once again, I mean, he couldn't have done any more, to be honest, to win a world championship point today. So hopefully he will get that, and I'm pretty sure he will celebrate it like a world championship when he eventually does do it. He's too good to not be doing well in Formula 1. So all the best for him. And of course, the Williams team in their first race with Doralton Capital, they would have loved that this week. But of course, talking of driver changes, we should move on to that briefly. So big news coming out earlier on in this week. Sebastian Vettel's future finally secured in Formula 1. Sebastian will be staying in Formula 1 beyond this season. He is not retiring, and he is joining the Racing Point team in 2021, which of course will be rebranded as Aston Martin. Now, his teammate has not been confirmed, but we are pretty confident that it's going to be Lance Stroll, as Sergio Perez also announced briefly before Sebastian Vettel was confirmed that he will be leaving the Racing Point team at the end of the season, obviously terminating his contract a year earlier than its expiry date. First things first, Courtney, are you delighted that Sebastian is staying in the sport? And of course, if you are or not, do you think this is the right move for Sebastian and what will be the Aston Martin team?
Well, yeah, he's one of the biggest names in this generation. You know, you don't want to see him go out the back door. He doesn't deserve that. He's contributed more than enough to the sport to go out in a respectful manner. And yeah, you know what I'll do? I think this will be a very good move for him. He's not going to have that pressure to instantly be challenging for a championship. He'll have time to, make his spot in the team, build his own team around him. And I really do believe that this could give him the kind of reset that we've seen with Pierre Gasly at AlphaTauri. He's going to be going from an environment at Ferrari which seems to have just gone plummeted, where he doesn't seem to feel valued, and I feel that he will be given that. He'll be given that respect at Aston Martin, and yeah, I do. I feel this would be really good for him, and I think Aston Martin will be another team to keep a big eye on in 2022, hopefully.
I think reset is the key word that you've mentioned there. It's a very important word in this context, where the last year, perhaps year and a half for Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari has been less than savoury. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's won 4 World Championships, over 50 Grand Prix. He is the third most successful driver in the modern Formula 1 era. Only Hamilton and Schumacher really have won more. Of course, Fangio has won 1 more World Championship than Sebastian Vettel. But when you look at the statistics, arguably only Lewis and Schumacher have done more. But we're talking about a guy that's achieved all these things, was dominant for the early part of the 2010s, 10 years ago, and still has a lot to offer to Formula 1. As I said, he's only 32, I believe. And, people have been talking about, will he stay, will he go? From what we know about Sebastian, he's not the sort of person that just wants to walk away in Formula 1, but at the same time, he always wanted to have a project where he can be involved in and be happy to be a part of. He just didn't want to languish at the back of the field. I mean, he's getting a taste of that now in the Ferrari, and that's certainly not something he wants to be doing for the next 3 or 4 years. Of course, we don't know how long his contract is going to run until, but this is a project at Aston Martin that we feel is going to be a very positive one for the team and for Vettel himself. It just seems they have all the ingredients there. They have the financial backing, obviously the rule changes that are going to come into effect in 2022 with the budget caps. They've got the new facilities, they've got the new simulator at Brackley near Mercedes. Everything seems to be falling into a place where Aston Martin is going to become a powerhouse in Formula 1, and they've basically put their faith in Sebastian Vettel to be the main protagonist for this rise in the sport, to challenge the likes of Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull, Alpine as it will be. I'm never going to get used to that name, but still, this is what they need to be doing. And I think as much as we love Sergio Perez and how much he is offered, and of course we should not forget Sergio Perez single-handedly with his sponsorship kept Racing Point going when it was Force India. There's that period where he kept it going, kept people in jobs in order for them to secure this takeover from the consortium led by Lawrence Stroll a few years back to keep the team going. That should not be forgotten. And Sergio has definitely been very, very quick, although he's had difficulties this season where Lance has been very good as a teammate. He's obviously suffered from COVID. We had to take those 2 races off. So for Perez, do I think he will be leaving the sport at the end of the season? I don't think he will. I think there will be an opportunity somewhere, but will it be one that will entice him to stay? There are going to be other projects and other series, maybe IndyCar or something like that. I think the McLaren IndyCar program did say they'd be interested in taking Perez on if he wanted to, which may be an interesting move given his obviously being Mexican, being a lot closer to home, racing in the American series. But it's a move I think we knew was probably going to happen for some time. It just seemed on the cards, and it benefits everybody involved. It benefits Aston Martin, it benefits Sebastian Vettel, and I think, as we saw before, how difficult it was at Ferrari towards the end of his time there, and how the car was no longer suited to his style of driving. I mean, you and I have said before, Courtney, in previous episodes, that Sebastian Vettel in the right car that's suited to his driving style and everything catered to his needs, where all he has to do is drive the car, is a formidable opponent for anybody in the field. And I think that's something we've not seen for the best part of a year and a half now, Ferrari, where that's kind of gone away and it's shifted in Charles Leclerc's direction, at least not the car has anyway. And that's why we're seeing Sebastian more than just languish behind Charles at most circuits. He's really, really struggling. So I'm really happy Sebastian is staying, and I'm really happy he's going to be shrouded in an environment that's really looks like they've got everything they need to get the best out of him in the next couple of years. So,
I'm just hopeful. Sorry, mate. I'm just hopeful that this does work out, because you want to be seeing the big names like Vettel, Lewis, Max Verstappen. You want to be seeing and Charles. Let's not forget Charles, because I consider him as one of the big guys now. You want to be seeing them all up the front, tussling for the big wins and the big points finishes. You don't want to. It's funny to start with when you see like one of the rivals of your favourite driver struggling. It's funny to start with, but it just gets to the point where it's genuinely sad. So you want to be seeing a driver of his caliber up at the top, because he's wasted where he is at the moment.
Yeah, you're right. And obviously we wish him well, and this is an exciting move for them. But of course we will be discussing what we think is going to be happening in the driver market, because we're obviously coming to that period now where some seats have not been confirmed, some opportunities available, lots of things that can be happening. But we'll be discussing that next week's episode, because this one is nearly an hour long, and we haven't got time. We want to give
we do like to talk.
We want to give a full analysis of what we feel in the driver market. So we're going to be covering that in next week's episode. Obviously, we don't have a race next weekend. The Sochi race in Russia will be 2 weeks' time on the weekend of the 27th of September. So we will be discussing the preview for that race next week, as well as our thoughts on the driver market as well. So the final part of this podcast now is this weekend was the celebration of the 1000th race for Formula One's oldest and most successful team, Scuderia Ferrari. Now, of course, you guys listening on this podcast for a while now would know that I am a Ferrari fan, although I do try to remain impartial on this podcast. I think I've criticised Ferrari more than praised them on this podcast, so I think I'm perfectly balanced in terms of my partiality for the time being, for as long as that continues. But as a reflection on Ferrari's impacts and importance, how relevant they are to the sport and what they've achieved, it's nothing short of incredible in any way of putting it, compared to any team in any sport. I mean, just looking at the stats, of course, 1,000 races they've now competed in, 15 world championships, 16 constructors titles, 238 wins, 228 pole positions, 583 podiums, and 255 fastest laps, 84 1-2 finishes, which, believe it or not, Courtney, is not the record. I believe Williams and Mercedes are actually tied for that. I might be wrong. I think Mercedes might have passed Williams on that one, but I don't think Ferrari have the most 1-2 finishes. As I said, I might be wrong, guys. Do fact check me on this if I am wrong. But looking at all of those stats, I mean, Ferrari practically there winning almost a quarter of the races that they have participated in. Looking at so many drivers of so many successful world champions, you've got Ascari, Ferrari's first world champion, of course Fangio mentioned as well, Kimi Raikkonen, the most recent champion, Michael Schumacher, Alan Jones, Niki Lauda, the list goes on and on and on. Jody Scheckter, of course, forget Jody Scheckter. So I mean, I'm not going to list all the Ferrari world champions, I'll be here all day, but so many great drivers in the history of the Scuderia Ferrari. If you can, as a non-Ferrari fan, try and summarise the significance of Scuderia Ferrari to Formula One. I mean, I don't think I'm wrong in saying that Formula One, unlike other sports, needs Ferrari in the same way Ferrari need them. And the sport is, as some people say in sports, no team is bigger than a sport, or no player is bigger than a team. In Formula One, it just isn't the same with Ferrari. Whilst the sport would still go on, when you think of Formula One, you think of Ferrari around the world.
That's right, you do. You can't have, it's a bit of a cliche, I said a lot, but I'm a firm believer in it, and that is you can't have Formula One without Ferrari. You can't. They are by far the biggest team. Every single driver that comes into Formula One does dream of driving for Ferrari at some point. And I've said it. I think I say it every single time I talk about Ferrari. Every single time, people are probably sick of hearing me say it, but they are a national institution. They are a big deal in Italy, and life would be very different for these people without Ferrari. Let's just put it that way.
I mean, I was watching a video on Twitter earlier on today, and it was a 3-minute video Ferrari put out to celebrate their 1000th race, and loads of people all around the world, not just in Italy, talking about their passion for Ferrari. You hear phrases and words, Essere Ferrari, or Forza Ferrari, appassionatamente. All of those sorts of words you hear, Italian phrases, but they resonate with you as a Ferrari fan. And for me personally, growing up as a Ferrari fan in Formula One, to remember the days where, when I first started watching the sport, obviously the likes of Jean Alesi, Gerhard Berger, Alain Prost driving for Ferrari, and obviously moving on to the days with Michael Schumacher, his successful period there, and how it meant, what it means to people. And the Italian Grand Prix. I mean, last year's Italian Grand Prix, a great example. The noise and the passion that was felt all around the world, not just in Italy with the Tifosi, when Charles Leclerc won for Ferrari at the Italian Grand Prix, the first Ferrari win at Monza since Fernando Alonso in 2010. It just means more to certain people than it could possibly mean to so many others in other sports. And that's not to say that, it's better that way, but there's just something unique, that sense of magic that you only really get in Formula One, that's unique to Ferrari, and the impact that they have on the sport and so many people around the world. And as I said, 1,000 races is an incredible achievement. And we were talking about Williams in last week's episode, how many races they've done, over 700, and Ferrari up to 1,000 now. Considering F1 has been around for 1,024 races, of course, Ferrari were involved from the very start in 1950. Enzo Ferrari founding the car manufacturer in 1927, and obviously going on to make the brand that, I mean, as soon as you think of Formula One or even road cars, one of the first names is going to be Ferrari for a lot of people. So, congratulations to everyone involved there, and here's to the next 1,000 for them. But of course, we do have to discuss, whilst we celebrate Ferrari, of course, it was a lovely tribute for Ferrari to celebrate their most successful driver, Michael Schumacher, who sadly is not with us at the moment, but he is still recovering from what we understand. Of course, it's very, very private, the news on his updates on his health, so we hope that he can recover to some level where we may see him at a Grand Prix soon, in whatever capacity that may be. So, fair well wishes out to him. But there was a tribute today where his son Mick, who currently leads the F2 Championship and is going along very, very nicely in that series, drove around in his father's F2004 Ferrari with his father's race helmet. Absolutely brilliant. And it made me miss the V10s a lot. It really did. Just hearing that car brought back many, many memories of Michael being successful. So it was beautiful to see. And of course, seeing his son doing so well in Formula 2 this season. He may well end up on the Formula 1 grid for next season, but of course we will discuss that. But going back to Ferrari, where they are right now, of course we reminisce on the history, and we've just looked through some of the better moments and what they've achieved in the sport. Where are the issues with Ferrari, Courtney? If we can sum this up in the last 5 minutes or so of this episode, where are the main issues of Ferrari? Why are they in the position they're in? And what do they need to do to get it right going forward? Because at the moment, they seem to be stuck in a position where we know they're bringing updates to the next race in Sochi, because that was confirmed by Leclerc and Vettel, aero updates. But where are their problems, and what do they need to do to go forward?
I think the problem, it would be ironic, I'm going to go deep into Ferrari here, given this is supposed to be a celebration, but I feel that the problem with Ferrari is deep within its very culture. I've said it many times on here. Ferrari is a pressure cooker environment, and I feel they need to reform. And who knows, maybe with these management changes, they will. There's a pressure cooker environment. It's still very apparent. There's a pressure cooker environment at Ferrari, and it needs to change for them to get where they should be, and that is at the top. They shouldn't be getting overtaken by Alfa Romeos, who are seen as a customer team. That shouldn't be happening. Not for a team the size of Ferrari. And it's just a culmination of events, chopping block mentality they had with management, which I'm pleased they haven't done that with Benotto yet. But that's what needs to change. There's too much pressure. You see a driver of Sebastian Vettel's caliber decline the way he has. I feel that's a reflection of what he has been working with at Ferrari.
And what do you think they need to change to go forward in terms of their car?
In terms of the car, I mean, they need to find a way around the engine agreement they come to, but they don't reckon that's going to happen until 2022. I feel that's a good move, though. I feel that they've actually stated the 2022 thing to take the pressure off them for the rest of this season and next, gives them some time to kickstart. Maybe they are planning to start from, which is the very culture of the team. it gives them time to do that, I do think that's a good move for them, because every season, you said it, we've both been saying about how big they are. They expect to be challenging for the championship every season, and if they start slowly, there's massive pressure. So to take the pressure off the rest of this season and next season, I think is a great move, and it could bear good fruit for them going into 2022.
I certainly hope so. I mean, as a Ferrari fan, from what I've understood about this car, aerodynamically, it's not very efficient. I think that's the one thing we have to admit. I mean, the engine stuff aside, I mean, I've heard quotes from personnel at Ferrari in news reports, and they usually say the same thing. They usually go and say, rival teams will kind of look at it and say, if you have around 60 to 70 brake horsepower more than everyone else, based on their old engine they had last year, you base your aerodynamic concept on that, which is to design a car with a bit more drag so that it can be faster in the corners, because you've got the extra power to go against that drag, so it doesn't really affect you as much as it would do with an engine they have now. And then you don't mind if you have inefficient downforce, because you still have the engine to really get you out of trouble. Since Ferrari have lost that following the controversy they had with the agreement with the FIA, which to this day we still don't know what they found. They obviously found something that Ferrari was doing wrong, and for some reason I don't understand why these details were never really formally published, because there's nothing for Ferrari to lose. There must be some sort of financial settlement or something. We're not going to get into that because that's pretty much old news now. Even though the other teams would still want clarity, it's not really a factor that everyone's really worried about as much as it would have been if Ferrari was still winning races in 2020. So, that's the one side. But now that Ferrari have lost that performance cushion, they kind of have to swap over to the other extreme now. And it's not possible for them to achieve that in a short space of time. They are pretty much paying the price for developing a car in the wrong direction over the last 2 years. So this is why in recent races where Ferrari have slowly fallen down the order a bit more, other teams are developing, Ferrari haven't. Ferrari's aim now is to build a car that's more aerodynamically efficient, with less drag and a bit more downforce. That is really, really hard to do in the time that they believe they may be able to do it. And we don't know if this will work. This may not work for them. And I'm hoping that Ferrari will address these issues, and what John Elkann has said about them moving in 2022, where their realistic targets are, and they're able to develop a car that can challenge for race wins and world champions in 2022. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I think next year might be a bit better for them with the rule changes to reduce downforce by around 10% again. To simplify it a bit, it might help them out, but it's going to be a big ask for Ferrari to be challenging where they feel they should be, at least until 2022. So I think that's a good place to end off this part of the episode. Of course, it is a celebration of Ferrari's 1000th race, so it's a fantastic occasion for them. Of course, not the result they'd want, finishing 8th and 10th position, but their first double points finish in quite a while, so that's something to celebrate nonetheless. Well, I suppose. I mean, Charles Leclerc did perform well, but the car was always going to be going backwards despite an incredible qualifying performance, and he's going to be pivotal to Ferrari's success in the years to come, but we'll discuss that in more depth. Until then, guys, it's been a bit longer this episode, so we do appreciate that. There was so much stuff to cover. We didn't anticipate this time last week we'd have an episode this long. But in next week's episode, it's not going to be as long, so do not worry. A bit more normal service will be resumed, but we'll be covering the driver market, what we think is going to be happening, any other news that comes up in the week or any changes, and of course a preview of the Russian Grand Prix in Sochi, which will be on the weekend of the 27th of September. Until then, guys, make sure to follow us on social media. On Twitter, we are DNF1 _ podcast, and of course on Instagram as well, DNF1 _ podcast. And of course, if you are listening to us on your favourite podcasting platform, which is not YouTube, make sure to follow us on YouTube as well. Subscribe to the channel DNF1 F1 podcast. Now, I will apologise. I know there was some other content for some of my team series that I did promise you guys would be out soon. Been a bit of a delay on that because I've been a bit ill in the last couple of weeks, so I do apologise for that delay, but we will have some episodes ready for you guys to watch on the channel soon, so I'm definitely looking forward to getting involved in that, so I hope you guys are too. But as I said before, make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out a lot, and we enjoy making these episodes for you, and well, we're absolutely loving every moment of this. I think it's fair to say, Courtney.
It's going really well. It is enjoyable. We do like to waffle on, but I just think it shows how passionate we are about this sport, and we've got a long way to go, but I feel that we're improving with time, and And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the direction in which we're going, mate.
Yeah, and we've definitely got some new things that we're going to be introducing soon to you guys in the future, so make sure to stay up to date with that as well. And speaking of time, I think we've taken up enough of your time, guys. We're almost breaching 70 minutes now on this episode, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. So thank you very, very much, everyone, for tuning into this week's episode, and those of you that have supported us from day one, or if you've just joined us, thank you for coming along on this journey with us. We absolutely love having you here, and we're hoping to make more great content. So until then, guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you on the next DNF1 F1 podcast.
See you soon.